One thing that has come up many times is the node count and the validator set. On the smaller side, I think when I talked to Sam last, it was around 116. Is that still?
So right now there are about 108 validators, but there's a SIP coming out, which is SUI improvement protocol, that removes that restriction. And the restriction is actually as a result of what's the minimal stake that someone can have, right? So you have to think about, like when we think about things, we think from a product perspective. You can add 400 validators to SUI, no problem, right? The question is, what are you willing to pay in fees and what are you willing to pay in trade-off in latency? So that's how you build any product. You start from the user perspective. What do users think, what is the minimum amount of latency users are willing to have for the transactions? What is the minimal amount of stake we're going to have for the network? And you start to build our network that way. And I'll give you some examples. Just because you have 1,000 validators, but guess what? Only 20 of them control the majority of the stake. Why have 1,000 validators? It's wasteful compute at that point. What security are you really getting at that point? You don't really get additional security in that regard, right? So also, if you have 1,000 validators, but I have no guarantees of finality, or it's all optimistic, or I have to wait for 16 seconds to a minute for real finality, does that capture the broad sense of use cases? From what we know, the lower you drive latency, the broader the use cases you can allow on chain. That's just a fact, right? The more bandwidth you have, the lower the latency you push, the more transactions you can have that are valuable and meaningful on chain. So our goal is to have the lowest possible latency on chain. The validator set, the amount of validators that are going to be in the ecosystem will be a function of what the network thinks is required. So if the network is happy to have 1.5 second latency for P90 finality, well, guess what? Let them have 500, 600, 700 validators on the network. Let the network choose, right? But then it just means that, well, if you have a world of 600 to 1,000 validators, but only 50, 60 of them control the majority of the stake, what are we really buying here, right? So I think people are unwilling to be honest about the topic. They just like to talk about big numbers when it makes no real sense or no incremental sense. So you always start with what experience do we want to build for consumers and developers. If it's low latency, let's go for that. And then let's make sure that the community can choose the primitives that works for them. If community wants 300 validators, they can freaking have 300 validators, right? If the community wants 1,000 validators, they can have that. But guess what? If you have 1,000 validators, that's 1,000 times replication, which means storage fees goes up in respect to number of validators. And then latency would also go up in respect to number of validators. It won't be as high latency as you get on ETH or Sol or anything else. It'll still be meaningfully fast, but it should still be a choice that the community gets to make.